I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer for Gold Derby, and I'm joined today by Tom Pelphrey, who is now Emmy nominated for his turn as Ben Davis on Ozark. Tom, congratulations on your first Primetime Emmy nom. Talk a bit about the day of nominations and how you heard the news.
Yeah, well, Luca, thank you very much. It's very exciting. So the day of the nominations, I was in Berlin, as I am now, as you and I are speaking. And so Kaylee and I were watching the nominations play out to see if she got nominated. I truly didn't think that there was a chance for a nomination for myself. So we were watching for the purpose of her and Flight Attendant. She got nominated. We're very excited, start celebrating. I saw a few more. I saw that Linney got nominated for Ozark. That made me very happy. And then we sort of walked away from the computer and we were FaceTiming with her friends and family. Mm-hmm. And then I got a phone call about 10 minutes later from the States. And I picked up and they said, you got nominated for an Emmy, which I was shocked. And then obviously very, very happy. So it's a pretty special day, pretty awesome way to find out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always funny because, Kaylee's category was obviously on the main telecast because she's in lead, but you have to sort of look up your category on the Emmys website, which doesn't even always properly work on nominations day. So.
Well, thankfully I had some help because I'm not the best with technology.
Right. And then, Ozark got a total of 13 nominations, including for your co-stars Jason Bateman, Julia Garner, and Linney. So I assume there was a shared celebration with a lot of back and forth texting, right?
Yes, absolutely. As soon as I saw that Laura got nominated, I sent her a text, F yeah, so excited. A few minutes later, I got one back from her, F yeah, back to you. I got a sweet text from Jason Bateman, who obviously is nominated for acting and directing, which is so cool and so deserved. Got a really sweet email from Chris Mundy, the showrunner, who is nominated for his writing, as he should be. It's really special. That job and everyone involved with it has always kind of felt more like a family than a job, and genuinely happy for everyone and genuinely excited that I get to be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Ben obviously bites the dust at the end of season 3, though not even everyone believed it. But then, unexpectedly, he pops up in a flashback in the 10th episode of season 4, which is naturally your Emmy submission. When were you notified that this was going to happen, and how was his return initially presented to you?
Yeah, so I guess people from Ozark reached out when I was filming Outer Range, when I was in New Mexico, at the beginning of when Ozark started to film, because they filmed their 2 parts in one big chunk. Mm-hmm. So at the beginning of that chunk, they reached out and asked me if I would come do a flashback, which obviously the answer was yes. I was really excited. It worked out timing-wise that I basically got to leave Outer Range and go straight from New Mexico to Georgia and join the Ozark crew. And it was, it was kind of a trippy experience because, as you know, the flashback picks up exactly where we left off. And so here you're like continuing a scene that you finished. I mean, I finished filming that scene probably 2.5 years earlier.
Crazy, yeah.
At least. And so it was wild. There was so many emotions. I was so excited to be there as Tom. I was just so happy to see everyone. Keep in mind, this is coming out of the worst time of the pandemic. People start to have vaccines. Life is starting to pick back up again. Here's my Ozark people, all the happiness of that. And then, of course, the nature of the scenes we're filming are dark and difficult. And so there's that. And then there's just the sort of trippy factor of being in the same costume in the same place, filming what feels like the same scene, except 3 years have gone by, and yet it feels like no time has gone by. It was very very strange. You know, one thing that was kind of cool was when we started the flashback scene, I was sitting in the booth, and it was the same exact booth that I sat in with Laura, right? When we filmed the scene in episode 9 of season 3. And now that I'm sitting in the booth, on the wall in the booth is a plaque that says, "This is the booth."
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Pelphrey and Laura Linney filmed the Ben and Wendy scene in Ozark. And it's like, wow, that's so cool and so trippy.
Yeah, that entire episode, and especially those last few scenes of Fire Pink really struck a chord with viewers, and obviously was very devastating for a lot of people. And, you know, I certainly had to remind myself of everything that he had just been through in the last 24 hours or 24 to 48 hours even, because so much had happened. So I can imagine that dipping your toes back into the character so many years later must have been a really strange experience.
It was. I was so glad I got to do it.
Yeah, and like you said, in this 10th episode, which picks up where Fire Pink left off, we get to see what happens in Ben's final hours and how he realizes that Wendy's abandoned him and that he is going to die. And in his mind, he seems to be doing it for Wendy. He even asks Nelson whether she'd be proud of how he's handling it all. Why do you think that's the case?
I think it's the case on two levels. On one level, I believe that Ben is very intelligent. Mm-hmm. You know, so I believe that Ben understands on some level that what he has done, which is also why it was so upsetting to him as he was doing it, that what he's done has now put everyone in a position where he kind of has to go. I think on some level, he understands that. On another level, I think just, you know, as a human being, that perhaps being faced with something that is so inevitable in a way that's deeply upsetting and horrific, that if there's a way to have more agency in what's happening, that might provide some relief or a little bit of peace, you know? And so I think for Ben, who is so in touch with his feelings, that the idea of like, okay, this is how it's going to end, and, you know, there's no changing it. I think for Ben, there was some comfort or some solace and some agency in saying, you know, I understand, I really do, and I do love my sister, and that's how I want it to end, on my terms, in that way. I guess it makes more emotional logic perhaps than a sort of intellectual logic, but that's how it struck me.
Yeah, and I think that also really plays into how much he loves and looks up to his sister, right? But also shows that he cares or is concerned about her judgment. You've talked about how you've always imagined that in the past, Wendy was very protective of Ben, and he was like a puppy who'd follow her around everywhere. So could you elaborate a bit more on what you think that sibling dynamic was like in their childhood?
Yeah, well, I think you had Ben as a younger person who I can easily imagine having a bit of a harder time interacting with the world maybe than your average child, you know, especially given that it's inferred that Ben and Wendy grew up in poverty, that they didn't have access to the best doctors, probably took a long time before Ben even got diagnosed as having a mental illness. And therefore, I'm sure it took a long time before he was on any medication or receiving any help in any way. And so, you know, all the more when I sort of daydream about that, you go, wow, you know, it didn't sound like the dad's around, but like, how much is he have an idea of how he should be versus the emotional intelligence to really be there for someone who's struggling. And I think Wendy has all that. I think it's what also makes Wendy dangerous, and the sort of objective analysis is like Wendy knows how to read people. And I think in the beautiful side of that, she understood her brother and loved him and took care of him. And I think, you know, in a lot of ways, she was basically his mom. You know,
Right.
she was someone who stood up for him, who encouraged him, who helped him have some semblance of a life and feel good about himself. You know, I think in a lot of ways she was his sort of lifeline to the world. It's what makes
Uh,
the whole story so devastating.
it certainly does, and you sort of touched on it a bit already, but how much of that do you think has to do with the fact that they came from such an unstable home? Because we learned that their father, who's introduced this season, was an alcoholic, was an adulterer, and was also very abusive to his children. So to what extent do you really think that Wendy had to take over the role of caretaker because of that?
In my mind, she completely did, and
Mhm.
that's exactly why. You know, because it's worse than just not having anyone there. It's that having someone there, and it's so chaotic that, you know, especially when you're dealing with someone whose emotional fluctuations are such that even given the most, you know, regimented or routined lifestyle, there's going to be fluctuation. But then put them in an environment where everything is chaos and nothing is dependable. And then, yeah, you know, Wendy would literally have to step up and take responsibility for all of it. And I believe that she did. And, you know, that's to me the heart of their bond.
That's very interesting. And then, you know, in that same car ride, he begs Nelson to pass along his apologies to Wendy and to tell her that he forgives her. You know, I am automatically assumed that he's just forgiving her for basically delivering him to the cartel. But do you think that there's a bit more to it than just that?
I mean, the thing that comes to mind when you ask me that question is, I'm sure, the pain that Ben experienced when Wendy left home, you know? And there could have been maybe some hard feelings about that, or maybe Ben could have thought that perhaps she had some guilt about that. And maybe he was also saying, you know, I forgive you for delivering me to the cartel, but also I forgive you for going to have a life, going to have a family, going to take care of yourself. And I understand it. That's kind of a beautiful way to think about it when it encompasses everything.
And then, you know, what's also really remarkable, in my opinion, is that he doesn't just apologize to Wendy, he also apologizes to Nelson, the person who's about to kill him. He says that he's sorry for putting Nelson in a position where he has to do something like that. And, you know, given that other members of the Davis family don't necessarily exude empathy, why do you think Ben is the exception in that regard and is capable of being so selfless in a moment like this?
Oh, well, it's so beautiful. It's one of the reasons I love the character so much. But I find that this to be like a general rule, that you know, if someone has experiences with life in such a way that are difficult, or that are emotionally challenging, or that expose them to a lot of their own vulnerability, that this goes one of two ways. This can cause people to shut down and get hard and get a sort of armor, or it can cause people to sort of open up. And sometimes
Mhm.
the people who have had the most struggle have the greatest empathy, have like the deepest understanding of what other people are going through and what they might be feeling. And to me, obviously, Ben is someone who experienced life in a way that was constantly opening him to greater and greater empathy and love and appreciation. It's why that, to me, he has such a strong sense of injustice when someone like Ruth is treated badly. But it's also why, yeah, why he would say, you know, tell my sister I forgive her, and also I'm sorry that you have to be in this situation. Like, yeah, it's just such a beautiful character.
It definitely is. And, you know, now that we've touched on some of the details from that car ride, I'm curious how you actually prepared for that entire scene, because it's certainly not a monologue like on the level of the one you had to deliver at the beginning of Fire Pink. But Ben's emotion in this car ride here in episode 10 are all over the place. He's constantly repeating words and sentences. So how do you even prepare for a scene like that?
I mean, this one was difficult. You know, it was. I'll say it this way: that when we filmed season 3, there was 6 months there, and there was this natural progression. I got to live in the character for months and months and months, and gradually the wheels were coming off. He decided to stop taking medication, and then you're sort of in that space and living in that space, and emotionally, mentally, it's just kind of where you are, and then sort of finish and put it away. So to have to well, to kind of have to jump immediately back into the deep end was a really cool, interesting challenge. I mean, on the technical level, I went back and watched a few of the episodes from the end of season 3 to just track again the sort of emotional through line, to hear the accent,
Right.
because I'd been doing Out of Range, which we were doing like a Midwestern accent, which is similar but very different to a Southern accent that I was doing with Ben. So I didn't want to mix those sounds up. So going back and redoing that, and then really just kind of on the day, giving myself permission to have some time before we filmed where you just sort of sit with yourself and kind of daydream your way back into that space, and then hope for the best.
Well, it certainly went well. It's a really, really, really great scene, and and then we do have to talk about his last words before he's shot, which are, "This is a dream." How do you interpret those?
I mean, there's the sort of Tom interpretation of it, which for someone like me, I really love that idea, the sort of ideas that live in the realm of like, what is reality, what is real, things like the Matrix, things like a lot of things that different religions discuss, but it's like, what is the truth of us? What is the part of us that maybe is more real than the other parts? How much of the surface is as meaningful as we make it, or as concrete as we make it? Get into the quantum physics of it all, and how much energy affects everything is just energy, and how much it's all interconnected and it affects each other, all these cool things. So the Tom brain thought it was maybe a reflection or a statement of belief, because I could imagine that maybe like myself, that a character like Ben could sort of read books about that kind of thing and sort of daydream on those things. And then the other way of looking at it, just objectively with like a cold eye, with like a less romantic eye, is just like the experience is too much to process. It's just too overwhelming, and Ben's mind can't wrap itself around what's happening, and so it just doesn't feel real. It just feels like a dream.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's certainly what I took away from it. Even though at first I was like, "Oh, okay," I had to take a moment to think about it, but I really like that perspective. And
it's really beautiful. They just really did such a beautiful job writing that character. I mean, really, like in the obvious ways and in the subtle ways. I thought they did such a beautiful job.
they really did, and that's a perfect segue into my last question, Tom, which is, you've talked about how landing this role on Ozark was one of the greatest opportunities you had ever received on a professional level, at least. So what will you take away or remember most from your time working on the show?
Oh, hands down, the generosity of spirit of everyone involved. Chris Mundy, the showrunner, is an absolute angel of a human being. So generous, so available, so kind. Jason Bateman, the exact same way. Laura Linney, the exact same way. They just set such a tone of safe, happy, calm. We're here to work. We're here to support each other and celebrate each other. It's really special. It really stood out. Been doing this for a while, so I've had a lot of different experiences. And from day one on that set, I was blown away. I told Jason about halfway through season 3, I said, man, you ruined me. He said, what do you mean? I said, how am I gonna, how am I supposed to like enjoy another job after this? And he said, he smiled and he said, well, if you like what's going on here, then internalize that and take it with you to your next job and you be the person, I thought that was really beautiful. But I mean, obviously they're also talented. They're crazy talented people, but the generosity of spirit on that set, and that goes for everyone, was overwhelming.
Well, it's always good to have a great experience like that. And that's really great advice from Jason to sort of put that energy into the next project.
Yeah, he's a special guy.
Yeah. So Tom, again, congratulations on your Emmy nomination. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak to Gold Derby today. It was such a pleasure.
Luca, thank you so much. I appreciate it.